The night, my daughter's ex stood outside my house and threatened my family. He thought he was dealing with an old man who would be too afraid to fight back. He had no idea that I had spent decades working around dangerous fugitives and serious threats. I had retired years earlier, and I had deliberately left that life behind. My daughter never told him what I had done for a living. Neither did I. But when he stepped onto my porch that night, everything changed. Because while he thought he was coming to scare us, he had unknowingly walked into the one situation I knew how to handle. My name is George, and for most of my life, I kept my work separate from my family. I never wanted my daughter Sophie to grow up thinking her father was some kind of action hero. My career involved federal law enforcement, and I had spent years dealing with fugitives, court security, and situations where small mistakes could have serious consequences. The U.S. Marshals Service is heavily involved in fugitive investigations and federal court security. But after retirement, I wanted nothing more than a quiet life. Then Sophie married Caleb. At first, Caleb seemed polite. He brought flowers to dinner and called me sir. But slowly, his behavior changed. He became controlling. He wanted to know where Sophie was every minute. He checked her phone. He became angry whenever she spoke to friends without him. One evening, Sophie arrived at my house with tears in her eyes. She had decided to leave him. I told her that whatever happened next, she would never have to face it alone. A few days later, Caleb called me. His voice was completely different. He told me that Sophie belonged with him and warned me that if she left, my family would regret it. I did not threaten him. I did not tell him about my former career. I simply told him that threats were serious and that he should stay away from my home. He laughed. Then he said something that I will never forget. You have no idea who you were dealing with. I almost smiled because he was right. He had no idea who he was dealing with either. That night, Sophie stayed at my house with her younger brother and my wife. We locked the doors and kept the lights on. Nobody knew what Caleb might do next. Then we heard a car stop outside. Everyone went silent. Caleb stepped out and walked toward the porch. He started shouting Sophie's name. My daughter was terrified. I walked to the front door, but I did not open it. Caleb shouted that Sophie needed to come outside. Then he threatened my family again. That was the moment. I stopped being the quiet, retired father and started thinking like the man I had been trained to be. I told everyone inside to stay together and stay away from the windows. I documented what was happening and contacted local law enforcement. I did not confront Caleb. I did not pretend my retired badge gave me special authority. It did not. I was retired, but years of experience had taught me something far more important than intimidation. Stay calm, create distance, protect the people inside, and let the law do its job. Caleb finally heard the sirens. His confidence disappeared. He looked toward the street and suddenly realized that his threats had consequences. The officers arrived and began handling the situation. Caleb tried to explain that he had only come to talk, but the threats had already been documented. The next morning, Sophie looked at me and asked why I had never told Caleb about my past. I told her something I had learned long ago. You do not reveal everything. Just because someone wants to know it. Sometimes the strongest protection is knowing when not to show your hand. Sophie eventually began rebuilding her life. And Caleb learned that threatening a family does not make you powerful. It creates evidence. It creates witnesses. And it can bring law enforcement into a situation very quickly. The U.S. Marshals Service itself explains that its mission includes protecting people, enforcing federal court orders, and assisting in fugitive investigations. But my experience that night was simple. I was not a marshal anymore. I was a father protecting his family by staying calm and calling the people, whose job it was to respond. That night, Caleb came to my porch believing fear would make my daughter come back to him. Instead, his own threats became the reason she finally felt safe enough to walk away. And I learned something I will never forget. You do not need to announce your strength. You do not need to prove your past. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who stays calm, protects the people he loves, and lets the law speak for itself.